The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold beneath a merciless sky. Heat shimmered across the horizon, bending shapes into illusions, yet nothing about the gathering at its heart was imaginary. 100 armored figures stood in stark formation, their pale helms gleaming white, their stances disciplined as statues carved from ivory. Their presence alone announced that this was no ordinary meeting. It was a judgment, and the one presiding over it was unlike anyone I had ever seen. She descended the ridge with the surety of someone born to command. The sand bent to her steps as though reluctant to disturb her path, her gilded armor flashing with a brilliance that mocked the sun itself. Each plate had been shaped with exquisite care, less armor than a proclamation. She was not merely a warrior but a sovereign, untouchable, radiant, and lethal. A crown of gold crowned her pale hair, its peaks rising like the spires of a forgotten temple, framing eyes that seemed too alive for this barren world. In them lay a storm restrained only by willpower. I stood among my fellow envoys, a line of humans who had traveled across uncharted space to secure an alliance with her people. We were briefed on their customs, their strength, their disdain for weakness. We were told to speak carefully, to tread as though every word were a step along a cliff's edge. And yet, none of the preparations warned me what it would feel like to stand before her. My breath lodged in my throat, my mind, normally disciplined, emptied as if burned away by her presence. The others lowered their heads in respect. I tried to follow, but my gaze betrayed me, sliding back to her. The sweep of her hair, pale as moonlight, the curve of her armor across shoulders honed by years of rule, the quiet ferocity in the set of her jaw. It was too much, too striking. A foolish thought took hold, unbidden yet insistent. She's gorgeous. I swallowed it down, or thought I did. But or has a way of breaking free, and before I realized, the words slipped past my lips in a whisper, so soft it might have been mistaken for the desert wind. Wow, she's gorgeous. I wish I had a wife like her. Silence pressed in on me, heavy, unnatural. My fellow envoy stiffened, glancing at me with horror thinly veiled. I cursed myself immediately. Surely no one could have heard. The whisper was too faint, too private. But then her head tilted. Her gaze, sharp and unyielding, found mine. She had heard. Of course she had. A figure like her missed nothing. The faintest smile, unreadable and dangerous, touched her lips. The line of white armored guards shifted almost imperceptibly, as though awaiting her command. My heart hammered. I had insulted their queen, trivialized a sovereign ruler by reducing her to a private longing. The weight of my mistake bore down until I could hardly breathe. Yet she did not rage. Instead, she stepped closer, the sunlight glinting on her crown until I had to squint against it. When she spoke, her voice was rich, commanding, yet strangely light with amusement. You wish for a wife like me. The words echoed across the sands, deliberate, carried by the still air to every ear present. My fellow envoys froze, caught between fear and disbelief. There was no withdrawing, no denying. She had made certain of that. I opened my mouth, fumbling for words that would smooth this insult into something harmless, but her gaze silenced me. She wasn't asking. She was challenging. A beat of silence passed, long enough to make my shame unbearable. I bowed my head slightly, forcing my voice steady. Your radiance caught me off guard. I meant no disrespect. The faint curve of her smile deepened, though it was not kindness I saw there. It was curiosity, sharp as a blade's edge. Her soldiers' white helms tilted toward her, awaiting her verdict. For a moment, I thought she might laugh and dismiss me as a fool. But she did not. She studied me with the same intensity a predator grunts prey, not because it is harmless, but because it may surprise. The air between us grew taut, charged with something I could not name. Behind her, the desert stretched endless and empty, yet in that silence, I felt the world had narrowed to the space between her gaze and my faltering composure. Finally, she turned, the braid of her silver hair shifting against her golden armor. We shall see, she said softly, though the steel beneath her tone was unmistakable. Words whispered into the wind are not without weight in my realm. You will find that they can bind as strongly as oaths. With that, she resumed her place at the head of her soldiers, leaving me shaken, my mistake carved into the memory of every witness. My fellow envoys dared not meet my eyes. The negotiations had not yet begun, yet already I had placed myself under her scrutiny. And worse, some part of me, hidden, reckless, and alive, was glad for it. The council chamber was carved into the side of a mountain, its walls gleaming with crystalline veins that caught the torchlight and fractured it into shifting patterns across the stone floor. We were led inside with a solemnity that weighed more heavily than the desert heat, and every step I took carried the echo of my earlier blunder. The armored guards flanked us in silence, their helms concealing any trace of expression, but I felt the judgment in their rigid posture. When the queen entered, the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the mountain bowed to her presence. She ascended the dais and turned, her golden armor catching the firelight until it glowed like molten metal. Seated upon a throne hewn from dark stone and crowned with a banner of a people, she regarded us without speaking. It was not the quiet of hesitation, but the deliberate pause of a ruler who allowed silence to unnerve a guest before a word was exchanged. My companions shifted uneasily, but I could not look away from her. Every movement, every glance, seemed designed to remind us we were not equals here, we were supplicants, and she was sovereign. Finally, she spoke, her voice ringing with clarity. You have come to seek alliance, yet already one among you speaks in vows. Her eyes settled on me with the precision of a blade finding its target. Tell me, human, do your people always bind themselves with whispers, or is it only you who mistakes desire for diplomacy? The word struck like a blow, yet beneath the sting was a subtle tone I could not decipher, mockery, perhaps, but also intrigue. My fellow envoy stiffened, and the eldest among us, a diplomat named Harren, stepped forward, bowing low. Your Majesty, if any offense has been given, I assure you it was not intended. My companion spoke in admiration, not presumption. Her gaze did not waver, and yet the admiration was spoken. In my realm, words once voiced are not cast away. They are remembered, weighed, and measured. Her focus returned to me, and for an instant, the vast chamber felt as though it contained only the two of us. You would wish for a wife like me? Then you must understand what such a wish entails. My people do not offer themselves to the faint of heart. My mouth had gone dry. To deny it outright would brand me a coward. To affirm it would bind me to consequences I could not foresee. I forced myself to meet her gaze, though every instinct screamed at me to lower my eyes. I spoke foolishly, but not without truth. I did not intend insult, only acknowledgement of your strength and presence. If that carries weight here, then I will bear it. A ripple passed through the chamber, soft laughter from some of the armored figures, a murmur of surprise from others. The queen tilted her head, her braids sliding over one shoulder like a coil of silver thread. Interesting, she murmured, though the word was less observation than judgment. She rose from her throne, descending the steps with slow, measured grace until she stood only a breath away from me. The gods tensed, but she raised a hand, stilling them. Up close, the details of her armor were more intricate than I had realized, etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly as if alive. Her eyes studied me without blinking, dissecting me as though she might strip away pretense and peer into my marrow. You speak as though you understand strength, she said quietly, almost intimately, though her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. But strength is not in words, nor in admiration. It is tested, proven, and endured. If your wish is to be weighed, then you must endure as my people endure. Would you claim what you admire without trial? Harren stepped forward again, his voice strained. Majesty, our envoy did not intend. She silenced him with a glance sharp enough to cut steel. I did not address you. My heart thundered against my ribs. The chamber blurred at its edges, my mind a storm of regret and reckless defiance. She was offering me no safe retreat, no graceful escape from my mistake. To falter now would not only humiliate me, but stain our delegation with weakness. I drew a steady breath. If you demand proof, then I will face it. Her smile returned, faint but edged with satisfaction. It was not the smile of a woman flattered, but of a ruler who had found something unexpected, something she intended to test until it either broke or endured. She turned away, her cloak of white fur shifting behind her as she ascended the dais once more. Then so it shall be, she declared, her voice echoing against the crystalline walls. 3 trials, as is our custom. If you prevail, your words will be honored. If you fail, they will mock you a fool unworthy of further speech in this chamber. The proclamation struck the air like a hammer on an anvil. My fellow envoys stared at me, disbelief and fury warring across their faces. One of them hissed under his breath, "You've doomed us all." Perhaps he was right. But the queen's eyes gleamed like stars caught in metal, and I knew there was no undoing what had begun. She leaned forward slightly on her throne, the torchlight catching the angles of her crown. "Rest tonight, human. Tomorrow, the first trial awaits." The guards moved to dismiss us, but even as I turned to follow, I felt her gaze linger. It was not contempt, nor pity. It was something more dangerous, anticipation. And though dread churned in my gut, I could not deny the spark that answered it, a reckless flame that whispered this was no longer mere diplomacy. This was personal. The arena was nothing like I expected. Hewn from the mountain itself, it formed a vast hollow lit by shafts of daylight streaming through narrow slits high above. The air carried the scent of dust and stone, sharpened by the anticipation of the crowd that had gathered. Her people filled the tiered steps carved into the walls, their white armor gleaming, their voices low but charged with expectation. At the center stood a circle of pale sand, marked with dark stones where the contests of their history had been fought. It was here that I would face her trials, and it was here that my whispered mistake would either become my ruin or my redemption. The queen entered last, as always. The murmurs of the assembly hushed at her arrival, their reverence so complete it was as though the mountain itself held its breath. She did not sit, not yet. Instead she moved to the edge of the arena floor, her crown catching the light, her eyes fixed on me. "The first trial," she declared, "is strength. Not of words or clever tongues, but of the body and the will that drives it. Stand, human, and show whether your admiration is hollow." A gate opened, and a warrior stepped forth. He was taller than me by a head, his armor adorned with scars of combat, his spear glinting with lethal promise. His helm masked his face, but the weight of his presence told me all I needed to know. This was no ceremonial opponent. This was a soldier meant to break me. Fear whispered its poison, but I refused to listen. I had no spear, only the knife strapped to my side and the stubborn fire in my chest. The warrior advanced without hesitation, the butt of his spear striking the sand with every step like the drumbeat of a funeral march. When he lunged, the world shrank to the blur of steel and the pounding of my heart. I ducked, rolled, the sand grating against my palms as the spear cleaved the air where I had been. I knew I could not match his strength. To stand toe-to-toe would be suicide. I had to rely on speed, on calculation, on the human ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. Each pass of his weapon forced me to move, to evade, until sweat stung my eyes and my lungs burned. The crowd jeered, some laughing at the clumsy spectacle of a smaller man scrambling against a giant. But adaptation was survival, and survival was a kind of strength. I watched him, studied the rhythm of his movements, the slight lag in his recovery after each strike. On his third charge, I darted inside his guard, my knife flashing as I struck the joint of his armor at the knee. The blade bit shallow, but it was enough to stagger him. The crowd gasped. He roared, swinging wide, but now his pattern was broken. I pressed harder, not with brute force, but with precision. Another cut at his arm, another at his side, each one a reminder that even giants could bleed. He faltered, and when he raised his spear for a final, desperate strike, I dove beneath it and drove my shoulder into his chest. The impact sent us both crashing into the sand, his weapon flying from his grip. Before he could recover, my blade was at his throat. The silence that followed was thunderous. Then the queen lifted her hand, and the chamber erupted with cries, not all approving, but all acknowledging what had been witnessed. I rose, panting, blooded but unbroken, my knife trembling in my hand. The warrior bowed his head and yielded, retreating without protest. The queen's eyes lingered on me, cool but gleaming with something that might have been satisfaction. "Strength," she said, "is more than muscle. It is the refusal to yield. You have endured the first trial." The relief was sharp, almost dizzying, but there was no time to savor it. Already she raised her hand for silence, her voice carrying across the arena with the gravity of judgment. "The second trial is wisdom. For strength without thought is a beast's virtue, and beasts do not rule empires." The floor of the arena shifted, panels of stone grinding open to reveal a table set with strange objects, shards of crystal, etched metal plates, a sphere that pulsed faintly within a light. An elder of her people approached, robed rather than armored, his face unmasked. He regarded me with the calm of a teacher about to test a student who had not studied. The task was explained with few words: reassemble the fragments into a whole, but beware, for the wrong sequence would collapse the structure entirely. It was not simply a puzzle. It was a trap for arrogance, punishing those who rushed without thought. I studied the pieces, tracing the etchings, watching how the light from the sphere bent against the crystal edges. My mind raced. This was not a human device, but patterns were patterns, and logic was universal. Piece by piece, I tested alignments, rejecting those that faltered, following the flow of the light as it refracted across surfaces. The elder watched, inscrutable. The queen, from her throne, remained still as stone. The crowd grew restless, but I blocked them out. Time stretched until my hands ached from holding the shards, until my eyes blurred with the glow. Then at last, the pieces clicked into place, the sphere settling within the crystal lattice, light flaring to fill the arena with brilliance. The elder inclined his head. The crowd fell silent, subdued by the glow. The queen's lips curved into a faint smile. Wisdom guides strength. You have passed the second trial. My body sagged with exhaustion, but her words steadied me. 2 trials endured, 1 remained. I had little left, yet retreat was no longer possible. She leaned forward, her voice lowering until it seemed the chamber bent toward her words. The 3rd trial is loyalty. For what worth has strength and wisdom, if they are kept only for oneself? The arena gates opened again, and this time it was not a warrior or a puzzle that awaited me. 2 of my fellow envoys were dragged forward, bound and struggling, their faces pale with terror. The sight jolted me, clearing my fatigue in an instant. The queen's gaze was fixed on me, unreadable but unrelenting. One path will spare them, she said, but it will cost you dearly. The other will preserve your safety, but they will die. Choose, human, and let all see what loyalty means to you. The weight of the chamber closed in, the silence thicker than stone. My companion's eyes pleaded with me, one shaking his head, the other mouthing words I could not hear. I knew the choice was no illusion. This was the heart of the trial, not strength, not cleverness, but sacrifice. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to preserve myself, to cling to survival. Yet I remembered her words, the weight she gave to vows, to the power of spoken truth. If I turned away now, I would not only condemn them, I would prove her right to doubt me. I drew in a breath that tasted of dust and iron. Spare them. Take from me what you will, but let them live. A murmur rolled through the crowd, some voices incredulous, others approving. The queen's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough for me to glimpse the truth, satisfaction, sharp and dangerous, but also respect. The gods released my companions, pushing them aside unharmed. My knees weakened with relief. She rose, her voice ringing out, final and absolute. Strength, wisdom, and loyalty. You have endured the trials, human. Your words are no longer whispers, they are bond. The chamber erupted in sound, but all I heard was the echo of a decree. Against every expectation, I had passed. And as a gaze met mine across the arena, I understood. The true trial had only just begun. The hall was quiet when we were summoned that night. No roaring crowds, no thunder of armored boots, only the hush of torchlight flickering across high stone walls. I followed the guards into the chamber with the weight of exhaustion pressing on every muscle, but also with the strange awareness that I no longer entered as merely one envoy among many. The trials had marked me, and the queen had summoned me alone. She sat upon her throne, not armored for war now but draped in a mantle of white fur that caught the torchlight like fresh snow. Her crown still rested upon her brow, though in the dim glow it seemed less a weapon and more an inheritance, a symbol of rule that no trial could tarnish. She regarded me without speaking at first, and I sensed in her silence both assessment and anticipation. At last she said, "You have endured more than I expected. Many have come before you, seeking favor or alliance, yet none have borne the weight of my trials so willingly. Tell me, human, do you understand what you have done?" I swallowed, searching for words that would not betray either weakness or arrogance. "I proved myself, as you demanded. That is all." Her eyes narrowed slightly, catching the torchlight with their pale brilliance. "No, that is not all. You stood against a warrior of mine and found victory not through strength but through cunning. You solved a puzzle born of our wisdom, though it was not made for your kind. And when faced with loss, you offered yourself to preserve others. These are not small things. They speak not only of what you are, but of what your people may be. The weight of her words settled on me, heavier than the gaze of her gods. Then you see me as more than a fool who whispered at the wrong time. A faint curve touched her lips, though it carried no softness. Perhaps a fool is precisely what I sought, a voice unguarded by diplomacy, unshackled by calculation. Tell me, do your leaders always measure their words so carefully that none carry truth? They do, I admitted, because truth, spoken carelessly, can wound. And yet it can also reveal. Her voice dropped to something quieter, a note that brushed close to intimacy. Your whisper revealed more than you intended. You desired, not out of ambition, but out of wonder. That, human, is rarer than you know. For a moment I had no reply. The chamber seemed smaller, the air sharper, as though her gaze alone had stripped away the armor I wore inside myself. And what will you do with that knowledge? I asked at last. Her answer was not immediate. She rose from the throne, descending step by deliberate step until she stood close enough for me to see the fine details etched into her crown, the lines of weariness hidden at the corners of her eyes. That depends, she said softly. If you return to your people, they will ask what you saw here, and your words will shape the path between our realms. Will you speak as an envoy, or as one who has stood before me and seen more than a queen? The question cut deeper than I expected. I thought of my companions, of the mission that had brought us across the void. We sought alliance, trade, survival. Yet none of that felt as pressing now as the nearness of her voice, the weight of her presence, the choice she offered me. I will speak honestly, I said. I will tell them your people are strong, wise, and bound by loyalty. That they are worthy of respect, not conquest. And I will tell them their queen is someone to be admired, though no words of mine will do her justice. She studied me in silence, the flicker of the torchlight dancing across her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before, though no less certain. Then perhaps your whisper was not so foolish after all. A long silence followed, filled only by the crackle of flame. At last she turned, returning to her throne. Tomorrow we will speak of treaties. Tonight you will rest. But know this, human, you have bound yourself to me, whether by accident or by fate. Your trials are complete, yet your path has only begun. Her words were final, and the gods moved to dismiss me. Yet as I turned to leave, I felt her gaze again, a tether that pulled at something deep inside me. The alliance we had come to forge would be signed with ink and parchment, but I knew already that it was not diplomacy that would define what came next. It was the bond forged in the heat of trial, in the honesty of a whispered wish heard by the wrong ears. When I stepped back into the quiet corridors of the mountain, my heart carried both dread and an unfamiliar kind of hope. She had tested me, weighed me, and found something worth more than survival. I did not know what she saw, nor what she intended, but I knew this. The whisper that began as folly had become a vow I could never take back. And somewhere in the shadows of that thought, a dangerous truth stirred, one I dared not voice, but could not ignore. I no longer wished for a wife like her. I wished for. The mountain fortress stood before dawn, its halls alive with the steady rhythm of boots and the hushed murmur of voices preparing for the day's negotiations. I had slept little, my thoughts looping endlessly through the queen's words, her gaze, the trials I had endured. The alliance was the reason we had crossed the void, but what pressed most heavily upon me now was not the ink of treaties or the weight of promises. It was her, and the knowledge that she had seen me strip bare pretense. When the gods came for me, I followed in silence, my companions trailing behind with stiff postures and unsmiling faces. They looked at me differently now, some with resentment, as though I had stolen their agency by drawing all attention to myself. Others with unease, unsure whether to fear or trust the bond that had been forced upon me. Their whispers did not matter, only haze did. The council chamber glowed brighter in daylight, the veins of crystal in the walls scattering light into 1,000 shifting fragments. She sat already upon her throne, armored once more, as though the trials had been a prelude and now the true battle was to begin. At her side stood her generals, their armor marked by campaigns I could scarcely imagine, each face carved from the same unyielding stone of loyalty. Yet it was her presence that eclipsed them all. "You have spoken truth and endured ordeal," she said, her voice filling the chamber with effortless command. "But treaties are not forged by trials alone. Words must be bound, lines drawn, and trust tested not in the arena but in the realm of power. Today we will decide whether your people are fit to stand beside mine or beneath them." The challenge laced into a declaration left no room for misinterpretation. She had not summoned us here to sign papers. She had summoned us to prove that our intentions matched the weight of her people's sacrifices. Haran, our elder envoy, stepped forward and began the ritual phrases of diplomacy, offerings of trade, assurances of peace, words carefully measured to soothe and persuade. I watched her as he spoke, noting the way her eyes never flickered, the way her hands rested still upon the arms of her throne. She listened, but I saw no spark of interest. Finally she raised her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Your words are like water poured over stone. They run smooth, they carve nothing." I have heard such phrases before, from voices that sought gain but not burden. "Tell me, human envoy," her gaze cut to me with surgical precision, "do you echo his assurances? Or do you speak differently, as you did before?" All eyes turned to me. Haran stiffened, his jaw tight, silently begging me not to speak. But to remain silent would be to accept the dismissal she offered him, and by extension, all of us. I drew in a breath and stepped forward. "My people need more than words," I said. "We need allies who can stand against the void, who will not abandon us when shadows rise. And I think your people deserve more than flattery. You deserve honesty. If we form this bond, it will not be easy. There will be sacrifice, perhaps blood. But it will be real, and it will endure." The chamber stirred. My companions shifted uneasily, but among her generals there was the faintest murmur of approval. The queen studied me as though weighing each syllable, and for the first time I thought I saw the barest crack in her impassive mask, a glimmer of satisfaction. "You speak of endurance," she said at last. "Then endure this. Our enemies are not idle. Even now, beyond the horizon, raiders test our borders. If you would prove that your people's bond is more than ink, then stand beside us in battle. Show me that your courage is not confined to whispers and trials." Her words fell like a gauntlet at my feet. The alliance would not be signed in this chamber. It would be written in fire and blood on the sands beyond. Haran began to protest, but she silenced him with a look. The decision was mine. I felt the weight of two worlds pressing on my shoulders. To agree meant committing lives we had no authority to gamble. To refuse meant admitting that our strength was illusion, that our whispered promises carried no weight. I looked at her, and in her eyes I found no malice, only certainty. She did not test us out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Her people had survived centuries by binding themselves only to those who proved themselves in fire. "I will stand with you," I said, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "If raiders threaten your people, then they threaten our alliance before it begins. Let the bond be proven on the battlefield." The chamber erupted with sound, my companions' outrage, her general's approval, the murmurs of courtiers who had not expected such a choice. She rose from her throne, descending with the grace of a predator that had caught its prey. But her eyes, when they met mine, were not predatory, they were resolute. "Then so it shall be," she declared. "Tomorrow we march, and in the fire of battle we will see whether your wish was folly or fate." The decree sealed itself in the air, undeniable. The guards moved to escort us out, but as I turned, her voice followed me, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You have bound yourself further than you know, human. Pray you do not falter, for the bond we forge will cost more than you imagine." Her words lingered long after I left the chamber, echoing in my thoughts like a vow I had not intended to make but could no longer deny. The trials had tested me, but what lay ahead would test us both, and perhaps the fate of our peoples as well. And though fear coursed through me, I felt a fire stir within, answering hers. For the first time since I whispered into the desert wind, I began to believe that my words had not been a mistake. They had been the beginning of something neither of us could escape. The desert wind howled like a living thing, carrying with it the smell of dust and fire. Dawn had barely broken when the army assembled, a tide of white-armored soldiers standing in perfect ranks across the barren plain. Their discipline was palpable, each warrior a blade in a greater weapon, forged to defend not just land but the very survival of their people. I had seen battlefields before, but never an army so unified, never a force that moved with such terrible grace. And at their head stood the queen, radiant in golden armor, her crown gleaming like a shard of the rising sun. She did not need to shout. Her voice carried over the host with a weight of command that brooked no resistance. Our enemies test our borders once more. Today, they will learn that we do not bend, we do not flee, and we do not forget. They will face not only our steel, but the resolve that has carried us through ages. The roar of her soldiers rose in answer, shaking the very earth beneath my feet. My companions stood behind me, pale with dread, unprepared for the scale of what we faced. Harren gripped my arm, his voice low and fierce. "You've bound us to this madness. We are diplomats, not warriors. If we die out here, our mission dies with us." I shook free of his grip, though fear gnawed at me as much as it did him. "Then don't think of it as war," I said. "Think of it as proving we're worth standing beside. If we falter now, we'll never earn their respect." The horizon shivered, dust rising in a dark smear across the sands. Shapes emerged, raiders on swift machines, banners of crimson and black snapping in the wind. Their weapons glinted with cruel hunger, their engines growling like predators scenting prey. They outnumbered us, perhaps 2-1, but numbers mattered less than resolve. Still, my throat tightened as the sight of them drew nearer. The queen mounted a beast of iron and sinew, half machine, half creature, its plated hide bristling with lances of light. She did not look back at me, yet I felt her presence like a tether, drawing me forward. I had no steed, no gleaming armor, only the rifle strapped across my back and the knife that had already saved my life once. I climbed onto a transport beside her soldiers, their silent glances questioning but not dismissive. I was an outsider, but one who had endured their queen's trials. For now, that was enough. The clash came sudden and violent. The raiders struck like a storm, engines screaming, weapons blazing streaks of red through the sky. Our line held, shields raised, the ground trembling as disciplined ranks absorbed the impact. The noise was deafening, steel on steel, energy bolts hissing through the air, the cries of men and machines alike. I fired until my rifle overheated, each shot tearing through the chaos with desperate precision. Beside me, a soldier fell, his chest plate pierced by a crimson bolt. I dragged him behind cover without thinking, my hands slick with blood, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned the screams around me. When I looked up, I saw her, riding at the front, her spear a streak of gold as she cut through the enemy like a storm-given form. Every strike was final, every movement poetry woven from destruction. She was terrifying, magnificent, and utterly untouchable. Yet the raiders pressed harder, their numbers unrelenting, their fury unbroken. Our line wavered, and for the first time I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the soldiers around me. I knew then that if fear spread, the day would be lost. I rose from cover, my voice raw as I shouted above the din. "Hold. Do not yield. She fights for you, fight for her." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the cry spread, voices rising, steel lifting. The soldiers surged forward again, steadied by my reckless defiance. I had no crown, no throne, but in that moment my voice carried weight. The raiders faltered, momentum breaking as their front ranks buckled. The queen seized the opening, driving her beast straight into the heart of their force, her spear flashing with light so bright it seemed the sun itself had descended to strike. The enemy line shattered, scattered like dry leaves before a gale. Panic rippled through them, their banners turning back toward the horizon. When the dust finally settled, the field lay broken, littered with wreckage and the silence of the defeated. The queen dismounted, her armor scarred, her braid heavy with sand, yet her presence undiminished. She stood in the center of the field, her spear planted in the earth, and her people gathered around her, victorious. I staggered forward, breath ragged, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. My rifle was scorched, my hands blooded, but I was alive. More than alive, I had stood, fought, endured. When her gaze found me across the ruined plain, it was not the gaze of a monarch toward a subject. It was the gaze of someone measuring, weighing, perhaps even beginning to believe. She approached, the crowd parting before her. For a long moment, she said nothing, only studied me as though committing every flaw and strength to memory. Then, softly, where only I could hear, she spoke. You fought not as a diplomat, but as one of us. I met her eyes, though my chest still heaved with exhaustion. I fought because I gave my word. Her expression did not change, yet the silence between us carried something new, something fragile but undeniable. Respect. Recognition. Perhaps even the beginning of trust. She turned to her people, raising her spear high. Today we stood together. Today we prevailed. Remember this, for the bond forged in battle is stronger than any ink upon parchment. The army roared, their voices echoing against the mountains, filling the sky with triumph. Yet beneath their cries, her words lingered with me. The bond she spoke of was not only between our peoples, it was between her and me, born in whispers, sealed in trials, tested in fire. And though the field lay quiet now, I knew the true conflict was only beginning. Full bonds that strong do not come without cost, and destiny has a way of demanding payment.